Time now for a new season of the Sunday Talk, where we tap into the big debate of the week. Tonight, Canadian values. Conservative leadership candidate Kellie Leitch is proposing immigrants be screened for what she calls Canadian values. That got everyone talking about what exactly that means and what people really want. Last year's election, identity politics were a big theme for the Conservatives.
When you join the Canadian family in a public citizenship ceremony, it is essential that that is a time where you reveal yourselves to Canadians.
Then this.
Establishing an RCMP tip line so that citizens and victims can call with information about incidents of barbaric cultural practices here in Canada.
Violence, the sexual slavery, the honor killings.
Then the migrant crisis surged.
We want to start accepting tens of thousands of refugees.
Justin Trudeau's Liberals won.
We beat negative, divisive politics with a positive vision that brings Canadians together.
After losing the election, Kellie Leitch expressed regret about her tip line proposal.
You know, in and amongst what we put forward that day, the message was lost.
But now, Leitch has sent out a survey to her supporters.
Whether potential immigrants or refugees should be screened for what her campaign, and she calls, quote, anti-Canadian values.
Those values?
People who believe women are property, that they can be beaten, bought, or sold, or believe that gays and lesbians should be stoned to death because of who they love.
A recent poll shows 67% of Canadians like the idea of screening. Does all this sound familiar?
Extreme vetting.
This is Donald Trump's policy on new immigrants.
We should only admit into this country those who share our values and respect our people.
I'm joined now by our panelists. Elamine Abdelmahmoud is social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine. And Adrian Batra is editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. So it's great to have all these editors. It's great to have you back at the table. So we are hearing through the polls at least, John, are suggesting that a lot of Canadians like this idea of screening. What do you think?
I think they like it in theory because they think, oh, that's great, there'll be more people in this country like me. They tend to project on these polls the values they have. When they stop liking them is when they start seeing how it applies to individual people. So, for instance, in Quebec, there was support in some quarters for banning children from wearing turbans while they played soccer. But then when you had stories of individual kids who couldn't play soccer because of this, and it seemed ridiculous and cruel, support dropped. I think you would see the same thing here where, you know, somebody's grandma couldn't come from India or Pakistan because they had the wrong views on gay marriage, for instance. As soon as you get individual examples of this, the abstract principle, which looked so good before, suddenly you'd see a drop in popularity.
What do you think, Adrian? Is screening a good idea?
Well, I think we already are doing that. We are already going through a process when they are being interviewed and they're being talked to, and there's some sort of rigor already that they adhere to the laws of our country, and that including religion, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, our democracy. So I'm not sure exactly what Ms. Leitch is proposing because she hasn't put a lot of information forward, but we all had this rigorous, discussion about something that we ostensibly already have implemented in this country. So I'm kind of personally struggling with why this became such a galvanizing issue all of a sudden.
Elamine?
I mean, look, it's a strategically valuable idea, right? It appeals to the base very quickly, but it's incredibly vapid. It doesn't mean anything because it presupposes that we somehow share a universal Canadian value, and no one seems to want to define what that actually is. Is anyone willing to say that someone who lives in, rural Ontario shares the exact same values as someone who lives in downtown Calgary? I don't think that's a statement we'd make. So I think it's a dog whistle, It's words that appeal to people who are looking to hear something about the Canadian identity, but it doesn't mean anything.
But then we're also talking about millions of immigrants in this country who came into Canada in the 60s and the 70s that may not adhere to the values and principles that we believe in now. Gay marriage, for example. I know that many generations of people in the Indian community didn't believe in that. Values change and things evolve, and you sort of move ahead with the times. I just don't think that Ms. Leitch was I don't know if she really actually understood that her former government that she was with had this this policy and value already implemented.
So how exactly would it work? Like, how would you, like, say you thought it was a good idea? Is it possible? How on earth would it work?
Well, I guess there'd be some kind of questionnaire, which I don't really see why people wouldn't lie on. If you want to get into a country, I guess you check a box that say, hey, gay marriage, sure, no problem, let me in. I think it would be very difficult to make sure people were sincere. I actually didn't understand Trump's proposal to ban Muslims, because how do you know what someone's faith is? I should also add that my own grandparents probably would not have gotten into this country, because back in the day, Jews were notorious for being Trotskyists and communists, and that was out of step with Canadian values then. I think it's true of a lot of cohorts of immigrants that they had at least something about their background which was then out of step with Canadian values, but we're probably pretty happy that we let in all those people and got the country we have today.
So you all seem to be saying it's a little complicated to imagine how it would be applied. But so if it's not really practical, then what do you think it's all about, Ellie?
Well, I mean, I think it's sort of trying to signal to some people what Stephen Harper might have called old stock Canadians, people who are somewhat afraid of a change in Canada, and saying, look, I hear you and I understand your fear. And I just think it's that kind of signal that's being sent out and is being very well received by that audience, I think.
And it's not just Kellie Leitch. We saw Tony Clement, who's also running for the Tory leadership, saying that potential immigrants from the Middle East region, that there should be extra scrutiny of those people. And there was great support for that idea. I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me, because ultimately, we are going to react to what we're seeing happening around the world. And there are issues that we've seen in Europe with refugees, and we've seen many more terrorist attacks. So people are going to respond to it in that sense.
But isn't that sad?
Well, but it's
isn't that
of
sad
course.
to you?
Well,
Yeah.
it's sad, but it's a reality, and that's how people are going to react. That is how we are going to say, I am not comfortable with this type of viewpoint. You come to my country. We do not believe in Sharia law here. We do not believe in FGM. We do not believe in female genital mutilation, which they do in many African countries. We do not adhere to those principles. Honor killings, that's just murder here in Canada. So there's nothing wrong with having that rigorous scrutiny to have those individuals who may have come from or coming from a country that this is one of their core values. There's, in my view, nothing wrong with screening for that.
I think it's important to remember that we're talking about this like this is sort of a right-wing phenomenon in terms of barring people who don't share our values. But if you look at what's happened in Europe, what's happening, for instance, in Denmark now, or what happened, Pim Fortuyn was an example of a politician who did this, you actually have leftists who are among the strongest nativists and the strongest supporters of barriers against people who have traditional values, because you have left-wing politicians who say, hey, I'm a feminist, I protect gay rights, I don't want to have immigrants in this country who challenge that. So I think it's more clever than we're giving it credit for, because in a way, you're end-running the liberals around the left and saying, do you believe in gay rights? Do you believe in feminism? Well, how about putting some teeth to that?
But isn't that a ruse? You know what I mean? Like, isn't that, because like that pretends like somehow Canada was already a paradise in those regards,
I think it's fixing a problem that there's no problem there, because Canada already is quite successful in integrating immigrants.
But that's why it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Like the only question that needs to be on that questionnaire is, hey, will you respect the Canadian Charter? And if you answer that question with a yes, then like, welcome. We'll figure out the rest.
It may be a ruse, but it's a more clever ruse than we're giving it credit for, because you're borrowing from the left and saying we're putting teeth into left-wing values, right?
But that I think is part of where I sort of stumble with this, is why would someone who is running for the leadership of the Conservative Party even make this an issue? I mean, we just saw right before we started the panel, the issue of the hotline and all of the stumbling blocks and the identity politics that the Conservatives tried in the last election, which I don't believe is the reason why they lost the election, by the way.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people would agree with you on that they didn't necessarily, maybe the barbaric tip line was a bit much, but there was a lot of support for the kneecap. So I'm wondering, like, are we Trumpier than we thought?
I think one of the ways that Donald Trump has influenced Canada is that it's made a lot of things sayable that were not sayable before, including something like this. Like, this is entirely untenable. Imagine like someone tried to say this a year ago. I cannot imagine.
I also think part of Trump's effect on politics is he's shown people that, especially if you're going to win at the primary stage or the leadership stage here in Canada, you need one big soundbite idea. And for Trump, it was build a wall.
Yeah.
And, you know, we know that building a wall is kind of a dumb idea from an engineering point of view, and you're not going to win an election in a general election now. But on the other hand, it got him to where he is today, within a couple percentage points of winning a general election, according to polls. And I think the lesson is you have to have a simple, digestible bumper sticker idea.
It's just so cynical, right? Like,
well, it's politics, right?
That's politics.
It's politics.
I mean, that's the world that we sadly exist in and we live in, and we'll talk about the current federal government like this in a few years. But, I mean, it's all a bunch of cynicism. But I don't think we are Trumpier. I mean, I saw a recent poll that 85% of Canadians, if they had a chance to vote in the next U.S. election, they'd vote for Hillary Clinton. So I don't think that there's necessary a lot of his rhetoric that is spilling north. But what he has done, and Jonathan's touched on it, is that soundbite. You grasp onto something that resonates with people maybe at their basis level, and maybe not necessarily saying the things that you were comfortable with saying before. We saw recently a vast majority of Canadians think that political correctness has gone way too far. So maybe we are, you know, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and you can talk about the things that you weren't supposed to maybe a little bit more publicly without, you know, being a misogynist or a racist or a sexist, and, you know, try to have some semblance of a logical
Almost
conversation.
out of time. Last quick point, Elamine, and then John.
I think I just want to say, like, I think we can call it racist, right? We can absolutely call something like this racist if we're talking about targeting immigrants from a specific region in the world, right? Because, like, that's really, this is about Muslims, right? Like, this, and we know this is about Muslims,
I mean,
is it not?
Well, okay, look, there's a fig leaf of universality here. Theoretically, they can say, well, you know, there might be all these Christians from Ireland who... Of course I don't buy it, but you know, it is at least nominally universal. So at least we are one step ahead of Trump, who actually got in front of a microphone and said, let's ban Muslims.
But always calling it the race card, pulling that out every time, it's an easy argument to try to shut down your opposition from having some sort of conversation.
When does it become racist?
Well, I think it becomes racist when you are directly targeting somebody. I did not hear any of that coming from Ms. Leitch or Tony Clement.
Like
I did not hear that.
When you use words like honor killing, we are, you know, we're pinpointing a region, right? Whereas
not
we don't talk,
necessarily.
But we don't talk
This
about
sadly
domestic violence in Canada,
it
right?
happens
like,
way
it's
too
the same
much.
thing,
It's
right?
happening in Canada, for heaven's sake.
Are we talking about honor killings, or we're talking about domestic violence writ large, which is a category,
that's a
right?
whole... Well, yes, obviously another big issue.
We are out of time. We've opened a can of worms here, and it's probably not over. I think, obviously, with Brexit and Trump, and now this, debate's going to go on for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you back. When we come back, filmmaker Oliver Stone takes apart some American values.
It's like dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's like you doing this on a new level of warfare.
Making a film about Edward Snowden opened his eyes to the sinister world of cyber warfare and his country's role in creating it. Plus, a landmark movie on U.S. slavery. Will it be overshadowed by the director's personal controversies?